And it is my great pleasure to invite to the stage our moderator, Jaroslava Johnson, President and Chief Executive Officer of Western NAS Enterprise Fund, who will introduce the speakers. Wishing you a productive discussion.
Good evening and welcome to Ukraine House Davos. I am honored to be a moderator on this panel focused on the view from Washington with esteemed speakers. The Honorable OKSANA MARKAROVA, Ambassador of Ukraine to the United States. OKSANA, please. Why don't you sit here next to me, okay? Robert Portman, former U.S. Senator, Republican from Ohio, Distinguished Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Rob? Dan Runde, Senior Vice President, and SCHREYER, Chair in Global Analysis, Center for Strategic International Studies. And NATALIYA BUGAYOVA, Non-Resident Fellow at the Institute for the Study of War. Natalia? My name is Jaroslava Johnson. I am President and CEO of the Western NAS Enterprise Fund since January 2015, and I continue on the board since my initial appointment in 1994 by President Bill Clinton. The fund has a vested interest in Ukraine's prosperity and future. The fund was established in 1994 by Congress with a $150 million grant and a mandate to invest and to have various programs. Since the fund's inception, we have spent and invested over $188 million in 136 companies, which employed 26,000 people, and in the process unlocked $2.3 billion of funds for Ukrainian and Moldovan companies. In 2023, we received an additional $136 million grant from the U.S. government with a mandate to expand our investment in SMEs and to assist Ukraine in its recovery. Let me set the context for this discussion, the rationale for this topic. The rationale for this topic is that the U.S. was a steadfast supporter of Ukraine from the start of Russia's brutal multi-front invasion in February 2022. Yet mid-2023, support for Ukraine seemed to wane in Washington and later in Europe. The question from Ukrainians and friends of Ukraine is why? Ukraine has demonstrated fierce resistance, an outcome that the Kremlin clearly miscalculated. Nearing the war's second anniversary, Ukrainians are continuing to fight steadfastly, although they would have had greater progress had the weapons promised be delivered on time. Today's discussion will serve as an opportunity for experts with unique Washington experience to describe what is happening in Washington, summarize current U.S. assistance developments, clarify U.S. security interests in the region, identify possible Ukrainian security assurance, and provide an assessment of what Ukraine needs to end Russia's provoked brutality. Let's start our discussion with Ambassador Markarova. You have been Ukraine's representative in Washington for over 2 years, meeting with President Biden and officials in his administration, members of Congress, political, corporate, and civic leaders throughout the U.S. urging support for Ukraine. What is your assessment of the current situation in Washington?
Thank you very much, Slava, and we already thanked everyone who organized it, from organizers to sponsors. I also want to thank, before I start, to a very special person in the room, General Mark Milley and his wife, because he has been, because he has been irreplaceable in what we have been able to achieve during the very difficult 2 years of war. And thank you, General, for your service to your country, but also for your unwavering support to us. So where we are now, I think everyone here understands pretty much where we are now. We all Ukrainians understand that it's existential for us. There is not other options we can take other than to fight for our freedom, for our loved ones, but also for democracy, for something that we are fighting, and for freedom. And US has been a supporter since not only day one of this war, but we have done a lot since President Zelensky's visit to the US in 2021 when we started working on how we can deter Russia, so the sanctions packages, the military support and everything else. And since the beginning, Congress was able to adopt 4 times the supplementary budgets to support us with not only weapons and assistance and all kind of security assistance and budget assistance, but also humanitarian, energy and everything else. But now we're at a very pivotal point in Washington, D.C. I mean, nothing changed on the situation on the front lines. Russians still have intent to attack and kill us. We still have fierce determination to win and to defend not only us, but everyone else. It's a fraction, frankly, of defense budgets of our friends and allies. It's a lot, and we're very grateful for every support, but it's a fraction of defense budgets, given that we are fighting the common enemy, the enemy that threatens all democratic allies. And yet, since September, we see the discussions in Washington on the supplementary budget package, which we, frankly, needed in October. So one aspect of that, and I'm sure we will touch upon it here, is we fight for democracy, and US and Ukraine and Europe are democracies. And in democracies, you have discussions. And it's election year. And it's a very difficult election year. And so the question is how to go through the democratic processes, how to involve the stakeholders, how to continue discussing, because, again, we're not autocrats, but at the same time, how to make decisions quickly. Because Iran, North Korea, Russia, Hamas are showing that they're able to take quick decisions and help each other and do their horrible war crimes. Now, the question for democracies, can we do that? And I think this is one of the biggest discussions. Now, from my discussions on the Hill on both parties, I can clearly say that we still have very strong bipartisan support. Regardless of these very difficult discussions, regardless of the fact that, that the discussions are ongoing and we were not able to see the package adopted before Christmas and the discussions are still ongoing, but there is big progress there. And I also, as a positive kind of sign, want to say that there is no discussion about whether to help Ukraine or not. The discussion, as you know, is about a different issue, not related to Ukraine, but in the same package with us, the internal border issue, which is a national security issue, but not related to us. And I always say, really pray and talk to all of our friends and allies and ask them to find a solution there as soon as possible so that we can move forward and get the support that we need, because we need it yesterday. Now, the question is very important also that we need the security's existence, but we need the budget support as well. It's vital, because we need to be able to fight on the front, but we also need to be able to sustain the effort. And frankly, in order not to ask for money endlessly, to have the budget support now is actually to sustain our economy and to develop the economy and to enable the investments which will allow us to be self-sustainable. So, to summarize in short, it's a very difficult time. It's it's a difficult time because it probably will take some time, but hopefully not a long time. But at the same time, from talking to people in different states, we just visited with Senator Portman, his state. I'm traveling every month now. I can tell you that American people understand this fight and they support it, because we are fighting for the values on which America is based on. Now, how to get from this support, from understanding to the decision-making, and to get the support that we need translated into dollars and weapons, this is the challenge number one, and I really hope that we're at the end of that process and soon we will have the additional support to Ukraine.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to you, Senator Portman. You have been a staunch supporter of Ukraine during your 12-year tenure in the Senate, and you've visited Ukraine 10 times. Can you give us a status support, idea of what the status in Congress is? What's happening in Congress with Ukraine support?
Sure. First, thank you very much for doing this again this year and for supporting Ukraine in every way. And Ambassador and I just had an opportunity to be in Ohio together, as she said. She did a brilliant job, and I think we were able to persuade a few people, maybe thousands. We touched a lot of people. Natalia, thank you for what you do. As some of you know, I think I gave 35 speeches or so on the floor of the Senate every time I used your material. Your maps are unbelievable. And Thank you. Into the war. And Daniel, thank you for your steadfast support. I mean, I would agree with what my friend OKSANA MARKAROVA said, which is that there is still a bipartisan group in the Congress supporting Ukraine. So as we talk about the fact that the funding has effectively ended and that we have trouble passing this supplemental, we have to remind ourselves that still a majority of Republicans in the Senate support funding for Ukraine. A majority of Republicans in the House, if we're brought up to a vote, probably would, but certainly a majority of the House does on a bipartisan basis. So sometimes when I hear the media accounts about this ongoing fight with the border policy and the Ukraine funding, I think they miss the point, which is there's still strong support for Ukraine, but there are concerns. And among those concerns are ones which we can address here tonight, and perhaps as ambassadors, all of you can be out there. There are members of Congress coming here to Davos as an example. I'll be talking to them about Ukraine. I will tell you they're staunch supporters of Ukraine for the most part. But one is this notion of the spending at a time of big deficits and debts, $34 trillion debt. How do we afford this? One of the answers to that I know many of you probably have already used is that 7 out of 10 of these dollars are being spent here in the United States of America, creating jobs. In my own home state of Ohio, we've had significant funding, over $80 million of funding in Ohio to create not just new jobs, but expanding our defense facilities. So people sometimes think this is a check, and some people say a blank check, which I'll talk about in a second, given to Ukraine. It's not. It's typically a check given to an American company that hires American workers to produce American products. General Milley was extremely helpful during his tenure as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And what he will tell you is that part of what happens here is as we are taking from our own stockpiles, we are replenishing those stockpiles, which we should have done anyway. Many of these munitions, I think you'll agree, General, are close or at their expiration date. This is a time for us to rearm America. We needed to do it anyway, the arsenal of democracy. And so not only is the money largely going to American companies, American workers, but it's helping our own military to be able, at a dangerous and volatile time in our world affairs, to be able to be better prepared vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis Iran, North Korea, and so on. Second issue that I hear, and this is one, again, that we should address aggressively, is lack of accountability for the funding. I will tell you, I wish there was the same accountability on domestic spending as there is on this spending. There have been 9 GAO audits. There are 20 different agencies involved with the IGs, the Inspectors General of Department of State, Department of Defense, and also at the State Department AID office. There have been many audits. There have been many reviews, 42 to be exact. And guess what they have found? The money is being properly spent. Now, I'm for absolute accountability. We should do all we can. But my point is we're doing much, much more than the American people realize. We need to express that and be sure people know what's actually going on. Could we do more? Probably, possibly. The other thing I will say is that the military has done a terrific job. As General Milley will tell you, they are taking this equipment from all different countries, not just the United States, on the border with Poland. They're then taking it into Ukraine, and they're keeping track of it. They call it end-use monitoring. It is unprecedented. We have never done this before in this way. So we know where every HIMAR is. We know, by the way, the HIMARS are still there. And as far as I know, and this could change tonight, we have no evidence of the Russians acquiring or taking any of that equipment that we are providing to the Ukrainians. Isn't that amazing? I mean, this is... And by the way, there are plenty of Russian armored vehicles and other equipment that the Ukrainians have taken. You've seen them probably, including on the streets of Kyiv for everyone to see. So these are really important points to make as you talk to members of Congress. The final one that I will mention is that either you pay now or you pay later, and much more dearly. And this is a point I think that we miss sometimes. People don't realize that if Vladimir Putin has his way and he occupies Ukraine, there are 4 additional NATO countries that are on the border with Russia, countries with whom we have an Article 5 obligation. Also, if you listen to Vladimir Putin, and you probably should, because when he threatens something, he generally has done it, including invading Ukraine, which most people in Europe here, never thought was going to happen in February of 2022. But he said he was going to do it, and he did it. So when he says he's going to go further, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, Slovakia, Romania, certainly Moldova, we should believe him, right? There we have an obligation to provide American troops, American equipment. In my view, and again, General Milley has talked about this as well, we will be spending a lot more, and we will be putting our troops on the line to be able to create Fortress Europe again. We don't want to do that. Let's instead continue to provide the aid so that the Ukrainians can fight their own fight. They aren't asking for our troops. What they're asking for is the ability simply to defend themselves, and in a sense, to fight our fight, the fight of freedom for all of us. So my hope is that this border discussion will be resolved. That's what's holding up the supplemental funding right now. Once that is resolved, which I hope will happen, certainly we all want it to happen yesterday because the funding is needed, that then the Ukrainian funding will be able to move forward along with funding for Israel. And that funding will be able to continue the fight for freedom.
Thank you, Senator. I'm glad you mentioned this best-kept secret about how the aid comes to Ukraine. Yeah. Because even last week's Republican debate, one of the candidates, the two candidates, said that he was not going to approve sending money for Ukrainian bureaucrats to have pensions. Yeah. So clearly, the evidence is that 90% of the aid stays in the United States, in 31 states, where military equipment is manufactured. So it's an important point to make to everyone that that the money actually benefits America more than it does Ukraine. Ukraine gets the weapons from the stores, so from the warehouses.
Good point. Good point.
Okay. Let's Dan now. Okay. Dan, you have run the Ukraine Economic Reconstruction Commission at CSIS and co-led a congressional delegation to Ukraine and Moldova this summer. And of course, you're a member of the board of the Western NIS Enterprise Fund with me. What more can US be doing?
Great. Thanks, Slava. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on this panel with such a distinguished group of people. The first thing I want to pick up on something Senator Portman said about this issue of understanding the consequences. I don't think we've fully connected the dots collectively about what happens, what the stakes are. I mean, I think we can be a little blasé in Washington. It's fallen off sometimes. It's fallen off the front page of the newspaper. Unfortunately, Ukraine is competing with other priorities, and so we need to understand. They are the shield of freedom. They are the shield of Europe. Vladimir Putin's not going to stop in Ukraine and all the places that Senator Portman was talking about. But also, if somehow this were to go badly, we're going to spend a lot more than if we. This is cheap. This is relatively. I know this. I know that's easy for me to say in my ivory tower at a think tank, but this is relatively cheap because we're going to pay a hell of a lot more if we have to station I don't know how many more American troops in Europe if this goes the wrong way. So I don't think we fully collectively have that's not been fully priced into the discussion. I think fully in Washington, and some of that's on folks like myself, and some of it's on. We just need to do a better job of that. So that's the first thing I want to say. I do think the second thing I want to talk about is the fact that we need to do a better job of getting members of Congress and congressional staff out to Ukraine. When they see it, they become converts. So this is not a criticism of the Biden administration. I understand what the Biden administration is doing. They're trying to keep people safe. They have a green zone. They've made some decisions balancing safety. But if you want to get a U.S. member of Congress to Ukraine, if I understand it correctly, a staffer from the State Department embassy has to leave Ukraine. And getting security for these folks is super difficult. So we need to find ways, whether officially or unofficially through institutions like my institution or others, we need to get congressional staffers out there. We took the first bipartisan group of Hill staffers to Ukraine. We had people who were anti the Ukraine. We did not take true believers. We took fence sitters. We took people who were a little anti, and they came away convinced. So there's lots of competition for making decisions about where we put people, time, and money. But I would argue we need to continue to educate staffers and get members out there. It is hard to get out there unless you're determined. And so that's the second thing I want to say. The third thing I want to say is we need to pass a bill. So again, this is not a criticism of the Biden administration, but it was their idea to link the Ukraine aid with the border, with the U.S. border, which is like a super insoluble issue in U.S. policy. Now, I'm all for getting a solution to the border. So maybe in their thinking was, we're going to use this as kind of like a grand bargain. I think that's great. I hope that plays out. It's a hell of a gamble. And so I do think that we need to pass a bill, and we need to do so quickly. You've heard other people say this. But I think we need to think about two other things. We need to understand that this is, I hope and pray that 2024 is the year of Ukraine's victory, and Ukraine gets its entire 1991 borders back. They deserve it. They are inspiring. What has happened to them is outrageous. It's disgusting what the Russians have done, and the Russians need to be expelled from Ukraine, and they need to be punished. What we want at the end of this is for the Russians to take a 100-year timeout on trying to invade Ukraine. They may get drunk one night and say, oh yeah, I really want to do that again, but that was such a bad experience. You never hear the Russians say, I think I'm going to go invade Finland, right? There's a reason for that, right? We want them at the end of this to say that was a really awful experience and we're going to not do this anymore. But what that means is we need to take a very long view. We need to take a very long view. So we need to get through this bill, but we're going to need political will to accompany Ukraine for the next 10 years. So let me suggest something else. We're going to need something like an APAC for Ukraine. We're going to need to give hugs to those members of Congress who do the right thing, who don't have Ukrainian Americans in their district. There are 0 Ukrainian Americans in the 2nd District of West Virginia. Now, maybe there's 2 or 3, and someone will come up to me and say, I'm in the 2nd District of West Virginia, but I don't believe it. There's not a lot of hugs there are a lot of Republican members who are not getting hugs for this. We need to figure out, we're going to need an APAC for Ukraine. And we're also going to have to educate American voters on the consequences of this. So we're going to need to have a different form of political mobilization. This is a at least 10-year project. So we're going to have to be, now, I hope the victory happens, but rebuilding is going to take a long time. And ultimately what we need to think about, what does victory look like? What victory looks like is for Ukraine to have the GNP per capita of Poland, the agricultural productivity of Canada, the manufacturing oomph of Germany, the Silicon Valley of Silicon Valley, because they got tech, the defense industrial base of Israel so no one messes with them ever again, fully a member of the European Union, and a member of NATO. That's a 10-year project. That's a 10-year project. So we have to take the long view, and we need a political process to accompany it. We can have thoughtful seminars at think tanks like mine. I'm good at that, and my friends at ISW are good at that. There are the Atlantic Council, there's many fine places, but we're going to need to accompany it with other things. We need to educate Hill staffers and members, and then we're going to have to take the long view. And I hope and pray that 2024 is the year of Ukraine's victory, and then let's do the process of rebuilding the country.
Thanks, Dan. Natalia, you are a fellow at ISW, the go-to place for day-to-day technical understanding of what is militarily happening on the ground since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. What is the biggest challenge for Ukraine on the front right now?
Thank you, and it's a privilege to be here on this panel with so many friends of Ukraine. I would say that the biggest challenge right now is actually Western perception problem, and we really need to set the record straight because the ground truth of this war remain the same. It remains an existential war. It remains a winnable war if the West supports Ukraine properly. It remains very much in the US and European interest to help Ukraine win this war, because any other outcome that falls short of Ukraine fully liberating its territory and its people will not be a durable peace, but a temporary reprieve that will result in another war under worse conditions with the same escalation risks and with much higher costs. It also remains not just in Western interest, but very much in West's capability to help Ukraine win the war, because the capability of the collective West dwarfs Russia. And it has to be just aligned to a specific objective of actually helping Ukraine defeat Russia on the battlefield. So we're at a point where it remains a winnable fight, that the West should and can help Ukraine win. But the perception of these realities is shifting in the West, I think for two key reasons. First, it's under appreciations of the cost of failure and the risks that the West will incur if Russia is able to keep its gains in Ukraine. Secondly, is because Kremlin is actually investing massive effort in trying to manipulate us into actually walking away from our own interests. And this effort to target Western will, the bad news that it's working. I think the good news is that Western problem is actually less than Russia. For the West to achieve its objectives and help Ukraine win, what it needs to do is mobilize the existing and latent potential. For Russia, it's actually a massive capability gap. I think the UK has set a great example last week in Kiev of what it means to be solidly connected with their interests. And I think it's for the rest of the West to snap out of this paralysis, actually regain the agency and repurpose and mobilize the resources around the objective of actually helping defeat Russia. So I think the biggest challenge is not the reality problem, it's the perception problem.
Thank you. The Biden administration has provided significant amount of arms to Ukraine. As of now, of course, Europe has provided more. There is some perception in the public that the slowness of Ukraine's counteroffensive was a result of the foot dragging by U.S. and other European countries in providing the weapons when they were needed. What was the impact of this delay on the war and on Ukraine's positions?
I think momentum matters greatly in war, and I think Western aid was a step behind Ukraine's battlefield needs, especially in the winter of 2023. Ukraine has gone on two successive counteroffensive operations in the fall, and could likely have gone on a third if it was resourced properly. And I think that the failure to proactively invest in Ukraine's momentum is what, in part, it was not the only factor, but it was in part allowed Russia to get the reprieve, to regroup, to dig in, and create that defense in depth that is made it so extraordinarily difficult for Ukraine to advance.
I have a follow-up question. In recent months, articles in the Western media have talked about stalemate, about stalled activities on the front. Assuming these descriptive terms are correct, what should Ukraine armed forces do to regain momentum, to go on the offensive and to liberate the country?
First of all, I don't think the current situation is a stable stalemate. In fact, Western decisions can tip the balance in either direction. I think to break out of the stalemate, two things are required. One is a shift in mindset broadly, and the second are specific actions. I think for the mindset, first of all, we have to move away in the West from the approach to strategy. I think individual measures, as game-changing as some of them have been, are not a substitution for an actual strategy for how to defeat Russia. I think secondly, it's to the point of needing to be proactive and proactively invest in successive phases of Ukrainian counteroffensive, because it will take more than one operation to liberate Ukraine's territory and its people. And we have another window right now that we cannot afford to miss, because Russia hasn't got on the right side of the capability curve yet. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, it invaded Ukraine with insufficient resources for the military objective that it set out to do. It tried to close this gap through mobilization of its defense industrial base and force regeneration efforts, but it hasn't gotten fully to where it needs to be. With time, it may, and I think that's the window we cannot lose. I think in terms of specific actions, the key priority is needs to be to help Ukraine restore its ability to maneuver in the battlefield. a lot has been discussed about what systems are required, and it's well known, but Ukraine needs to increase its air power. Ukraine needs ability to destroy Russian AW capability so it can launch strikes closer to the front line. It needs long-range strike capability to separate the battlefield from Russian reserves. I think all of that is well discussed. We don't need to reiterate that, but that's a priority together with targeting Russia's capability, not just on but off the battlefield as well, including starving its defense industrial base from both cash. That means we need to start with half measures in terms of Russian energy, but also not amplifying it with access to Western electronics, for starters, and many other, I think, measures that are well discussed.
Thank you. I have a question for all four of you. Just before the winter holidays, there were articles in the press that Russia was ready for peace talks. Yet, Russia's massive missile and drone attack on Ukrainian cities throughout the holiday season proved these claims to be false, and that President Putin's initial objective to obliterate Ukraine was still in place. In your opinion, what could be the basis for any peace talks and when? OKSANA?
Can you hear me, or shall I take the mic? Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's really surprising that almost 2 years after the full-fledged attack, and literally 10 years after Putin attacked us the first time, that people still believe in some fantasies that Putin's intentions changed. He tells us what he wants to do, and he didn't change that. Every time he speaks publicly, he says how he's going to destroy us, West, the names of the countries. He does on the battlefield, I mean, the war crimes, the attacks, the missiles, everything. And then he does not respond to any plausible initiatives like President Zelensky's peace formula plan, which clearly lays out a path based on the UN decisions already taken by 154 countries, 150 countries in some instances, on how to restore peace. Now, look, this is a very black and white situation. It was unprovoked, unjustified aggression. The peace can return to Ukraine very quickly. Putin stops the war and gets out from Ukraine, peace. Then we can work on justice, on everything else. And it's really surprising that when we are fighting this very difficult fight, again, what Natalia said very clearly, that it's not only not a stalemate, it's a very hot war on 800 miles or more than 1,000 kilometers front line, which is, as we discussed, longer than from Washington to Chicago. And we are able not only to hold this line, compared to the two countries, but we were able to actually organize our own grain corridor, clear the Black Sea. Just yesterday, as you all know, another very valuable asset of Russians went down the plains. And it's just remarkable that when we actually show that it's winnable, we are devoted to this fight. We know that just with a little bit more assistance, but also very importantly, doubling down on sanctions, on isolation, we can win. And then instead of actually doing exactly what is needed to win, some people start discussing again, well, maybe Putin wants peace. Yeah. No, he doesn't. And I think that the faster we all accept that reality and realize that we just have to do what really works. Defend us, defend Europe, defend the values that we all hold dear. And just a little bit more on the sanctions and why it is very important. It's as important as missiles. So we started with, of course, right now in Washington, we all are focused on getting the supplementary budget supported and voted. But we have to keep focus on the strategic perspective. Right now, of course, we need this money desperately in order for Pentagon to be able to provide us with the weapons, and the State Department and Commerce and Treasury to provide us with all other assistance. But we have to also isolate Russia and stop them from being able to fund this war, but also to develop everything. Out of 330 Russian banks, there is still a handful, literally a couple of dozens, that under the full blocking sanctions. We should sanction all of them. All of them, literally. It's time for the sectoral sanctions, except for those which are still used, or some subsidiaries. And in each industry, we can go industry by industry and just tighten the sanctions to the point that they will really feel and cannot find this new balance, which they have apparently found. Plus, they have started buying and using, and we all have proof already, the North Korean missiles. That's a blatant violation of not only the, human decency and everything else, which they violate during the previous 2 years and 10 years, actually, but it's a violation of the UN decisions, which Russia actually supported and voted for. Let's do something about it. So I think it's time also for us not just to focus on what needs to be done now to sustain the assistance, but what can we all do to actually move further, to double down on our side, so that they realize that they cannot sustain the effort.
Thank you. Senator Portman.
One of my great frustrations is when I hear people say, both in Europe and the United States, if we just backed off, we could get Putin to go to the bargaining table. And they say this on the floor of the United States Senate. There is absolutely no evidence of that. And I think we need to refute it in the strongest terms possible. The only way Vladimir Putin goes to a bargaining table is if he believes that we, being not just the West, not just Ukraine, but the freedom-loving world, is going to stand firm. And he respects military power. And he respects the ability to project force. And if we did have the Abrams M1 tanks from Ohio in action in a more significant way, if we did have F-16s in the air, if we did have TACOM missiles in place, which are longer range than the ones they have, if we did have munitions that are necessary right now, it would be much more likely that we could get a resolution of this crisis. But if we back off the sense that somehow he will come to the bargaining table, it just makes no sense historically with him, historically in terms of the world. In the 1930s, many people argued this as well, as you know. So I think it's really important that we push back hard on this notion that somehow there can be a peaceful end to this and we can all join hands and sing Kumbaya and walk away if we just back off. That's not how this is going to end. It's going to end when we win. And when we win, then militarily, then there's a chance of having a longer-term peace. It's not going to be easy. It never is with dictators like Vladimir Putin. I do think that we were on a better track in terms of exhausting their missile supply and their munitions before he went to Iran first. And those drones had come in hordes from Iran, have helped Russia quite a bit. And then, of course, North Korea. And as the ambassador said, Russia actually voted against North Korea being able to export military weaponry. And then, even though Vladimir Putin said he wouldn't do it, they're now purchasing weapons there. That's given them a little second opportunity to replenish their supplies. But that will be limited too at some point. And so we cannot back off. We cannot just assume that somehow if we back off, things will get better. They will get worse. And the consequences, in my view, will be that the United States will spend a lot more money and put our young men and women in uniform in harm's way in ways that none of us want to see. So I wish it were a simpler answer, but I think the answer is provide the Ukrainians what they need and win at the battlefield, and that way you can get to the bargaining table.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. Give the Ukrainians what they need. I agree with Senator Portman. I think Vladimir Putin is a liar. He's a liar. And you can't trust his word. Just look at his track record. He has lied and lied and lied. And so there is this comfort, there's this deception because it's been long, and I think in the West and the United States in particular, because of the Iraq War, because of Afghanistan, there's a temptation for the United States to want to take a sabbatical from global leadership. That's different than saying we want to turn it over to the Chinese to lead the world, but we'd like a vacation from global leadership. So this is kind of coming at an inconvenient time. And so a lot of the kinds of things that we tell ourselves, well, maybe if we just, back off, now he's ready, and he knows, he understands our weaknesses. I I mean, he's a former KGB agent, right? I mean, so they traffic in lies, they traffic in disinformation, they interfere in our elections, they interfere in other elections. These are bad people. So ultimately, we're going to have to provide the weapon system. I know there's some grand strategy, I think, to like, we don't want to provoke Putin, and if we just give them this weapon and it goes this far, like I said, it's easy for me to sit in my think tank and think deep thoughts, but it just seems to me that they need to have all the weapons they can get. I do want to say something else. The Chinese are not Ukraine's friend. They are financing the Russian war effort just as much as the North Koreans and the Iranians. The Star Wars bar of thug countries are backing the Russians, including the Chinese Communist Party. So I want to make it very, very clear that, we need, that they are not Ukraine's friend. China is not Ukraine's friend. And so I do think, will say one other thing. I want to emphasize this issue of, I'm an American and I'm going to say this, that joining the European Union is like a really important thing. Like as part of like what peace looks like, being a full-fledged card-carrying member of Europe is a super important thing for Ukraine. What I say to American audiences, what would you have done to join the coolest fraternity or the coolest sorority in college? That's what joining the EU is like. And so the hazing that goes on, they have these 7 buckets of things that Ukraine's supposed to do and meet these requirements. And that is, there's not, we can write white papers, we can hold seminars, there's not enough foreign aid to kind of change the trajectory of the country. Joining the European Union is going to change the future of Ukraine. So it's really, really important. So what peace looks like and what winning looks like is that Ukraine is a member of the EU and ultimately, I think, a member of NATO. It may take a while longer, but we got to work towards that. But Vladimir Putin is a liar. And China's not Ukraine's friend.
Okay. Thank you. Natalia?
Yeah, I think on the point of talks and ceasefire, first, a reminder that Russia does not need a ceasefire or talks to end the war. In fact, it remains entirely the war of choice, and Putin can choose peace at any point of time. It should not be on Ukraine to signal willingness to talk. In fact, Ukraine has always chosen peace until the war was imposed on it. The West has always chosen peace to the point where it's self-deterred. Russia continues to choose war in part because Putin believes he can actually win at this point. I think secondly, any ceasefire or talks are not off-ramps for Russia. They are actually on-ramps for the Kremlin for a renewed attack on the conditions that benefit Russia. And we should remember that. I think third and final point, we should also remember that signaling of negotiations is actually an obfuscation method. It's part of Russia's information campaign that Russia uses as an offset capability to advance its goals beyond the limits of its real power. And this phoenix of the ceasefire narrative that has been resurging with specific intervals is part of this effort. And every time we let that narrative distract us from actual effort to target Russia's capability to sustain the war, we see an advantage of momentum and critical time to the adversary. So I think we should stop trying to shape the reality we do not control, which is Putin's mind and intent, and focused on targeting the reality we can control and shape plenty, which is Russia's capability to sustain this war.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I understand the General has a question? No. Okay, well, look.
Give us some thoughts. Put you on the spot here.
By all means.
Well, first of all, the microphone.
Here.
Here it comes.
Well, first of all, thanks for all of you for doing this, and Ambassador, it's good to see you here. I think one key point that is not lost on anyone in this room, but needs to be remembered over and over and over again, is that Russia executed an unprovoked war of aggression. Ukraine was never, ever going to attack Russia. And Putin made it clear ahead of time that he was going to, and he did. And as Senator Portman said, it's worthwhile to listen to Putin as to what he will say. And I believe, I don't think it was Putin, but one of his folks said just the other day that next is Poland, sort of thing. So I think that it's absolutely in the interest of the United States and Europe, not just Ukraine, to make sure that we prevail in this thing. There's a much bigger issue at stake. For Ukraine, it's an existential threat to its survival. And arguably for Europe, it's a significant and biggest war since 1945 on European soil. But I would argue that the real threat of this whole thing is to an international order that was established in 1945 as a result of World War II. We fought World War I and World War II, 30 years of unrelenting warfare across the globe that resulted in 150 million people getting killed. And it ended in 2 nuclear weapons being dropped on Japan. At the end of World War II, the powers that be, led by the United States, said we can't do this again. We can't have another war of that scale and scope. And so they established a set of rules. And those rules are what govern the world today. Like them or hate them, that's what governs the world. And since 1945, we haven't had a great power war. That's worth remembering. And we're in the 80th year of not having a great power war. That's important. The last 2 orders in Europe lasted 100 years. 1815, the end of Napoleon, to 1914 in August. And then before that was 1648 to the 1750s. So, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So the time is now, the place is Ukraine, to ensure that we prevent another great power war. And the way to do that is to make sure that the aggressor, Russia, fails in their war of aggression. And I think the support from Europe, the United States, and the international community to Ukraine is critical. That's military support, financial support, sanctions, diplomatic support, and the whole 9 yards. But it's really critical that Putin not succeed here. There's much greater things at stake for all of us, for the entire world community, I think, as to what this war is about. It's not just about Ukraine. It's about a much bigger issue. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, General. I want to thank our illustrious panel, Ambassador Markarova, Senator Portman, Dan Runde, and NATALIYA Bugayova, for your informative and thought-provoking answers and questions, and for the discussion that I think will be important for Ukraine in the coming year, for sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank all the panelists and the moderator for this panel.
Yes,
thank you very much, and I do hope that we will definitely, increase the support of the yes, and we all will target our victory next year, and meet here to celebrate this. Yes, and this is the small to keep you warm in Davos. Please, this is our small presents for you. By this, I would like to wrap up this panel, and next panel will start in 15 minutes, so please stay. We have a great coffee downstairs in the networking area, and we invite all of you also to visit the exhibition. Also, we will have the networking reception in Ukrainian style, so please do join us today in the evening, and see you soon. Thank you.